Okay. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. I hope this is the right mic. Let me double check that. Properties. Yep, sure digital. There we go. How's everyone doing today? Oh, I forgot the music. I gotta get my music up. Ready to police hall. Main hall theme. Main hall theme. There we go. Make that nice and quiet. Loop it. And we're going to go. How's everyone doing? Swimming in sweat. 3 inches deep? I just lay back and claim defeat? Anyone get that reference? Anyone? No? Okay. Well, anyway. Who's ready to start? I'm excited to start this again. I'm more doing this for myself at this point. It feels like this hasn't been the most popular series on my channel, but yeah, I like relaxing with you folks, and so it's a little more of a fun personal thing I can do for the channel. Oh, you got the day off? Oh, yeah, that is hopefully it's an enjoyable way to spend it. Last time in Resident Evil, Leon met Ben Berlucci and Ada Wong, and Claire had her first run-in with Sherry Birkin, as well as the first ever run-in with the illustrious liquor, or one of the illustrious liquors living around this police station. Now we're moving on to Chapter 15. Leon found Ada in the kennel, straining to lever up the rusted manhole with the reporter had told them about. She turned up a crowbar from somewhere and had it wedged beneath this thick iron plate, her well-defined bicep lightly sheen with sweat as she worked the bar. She managed to raise the cover about an inch, but let it drop back into place as he walked, the metallic clang loud in the cold, empty room. Before he could say anything, she laid the crowbar on the cement floor and looked up at him with a strained half-smile, brushing her rust-dirty hands. "I'm glad you're here. I don't think I'm strong enough to lift this by myself." He hadn't been sure, but the helpless look she gave him clinched it. She was playing him, or trying to. He'd known Ada for all of 20 minutes, but he doubted seriously that she'd ever been helpless about anything. "Looks like you're doing just fine," he said, holstering the magnum, but not making any move towards the manhole. He crossed his arms, frowning slightly. He wasn't angry, just curious. "Besides, what's the hurry? I thought you wanted to talk to the reporter about John, your umbrella friend." The woman in distress looked melted away, and her delicate features turned cool and hard, but not in a bad way. It was as though she was letting her real self show, the strong, self-assured Ada that he'd first met. Leon could tell that he'd surprised her, not by rushing her to aid her, and was glad to see it. He had enough to worry about without being manipulated by a mysterious stranger. She'd been very careful to avoid his questions, but it was time for Miss Wong to explain a few things. Ada stood up, meeting his gaze evenly. "You heard him. He wasn't going to tell us anything. And with this place as dangerous as it is, I don't really want to stand around here waiting for him to develop a conscience." "Sup, Fallen Knight?" She dropped her gaze, her voice softening. "It's weird. I don't want to cover. I want to cover. I have this nasty zit on my forehead that I want to cover, but like at the same time, it's hard to read with my hair in my face. So I'm like, what do I do?" Luckily, it looks like my face is blown out enough, but yeah, that's still pretty to look at. She dropped her gaze, her voice softening. "And I don't know if John's. I don't even know if John's in Raccoon, but I do know that he's not here, and I want to leave before the station is completely overrun." It sounded good, but for some reason he had the feeling that she was holding something back. For a few seconds he struggled to think of a polite way to get her to open up, then decided to hell with it. Under the circumstances, social graces would have to be suspended. "What's going on, Ada? Do you know something that you're not telling me?" She looked at him again, and again he had the feeling that he'd surprised her, but her cool, dark gaze was unreadable as ever. I just want to get out of here, she said, and the sincerity of her tone was impossible to deny. If he didn't believe anything else she'd said, he had to believe that much. I wish it was that easy. But there's Claire and even Ben, our asshole friend, and God knows how many others. Leon shook his head. I can't leave. Like I said, I could be the only cop left around here. If there are still people in the building, I have to at least help them. And I think it'd be best if you came with me. Oh, welcome Marius Weed Death. What kind of name is that? Ada gave him another look. Ada gave him another one of her half smiles. I appreciate your concern, Leon, but I can take care of myself. He didn't doubt it, but he also didn't want to see her abilities tested. Granted, he was pretty untested himself, but he'd been trained to deal with crisis situations. It was his job. And to be honest with yourself, you lost Claire, you couldn't help Branagh, and Ben Bertolucci could give a rat's ass for your protection skills. You don't want to fail with Ada. You don't want to fail with Ada on top of all that. And you don't want to be alone. Ada seemed to know what he was thinking. Before he could come up with a convincing argument, she stepped forward and put one slender hand on his arm, the humor fading from her bright eyes. I know you want to do your job here, but you said it yourself. We have to find a way out of Raccoon to try and get help, outside help. And the sewers are probably the best chance we've got. I see. Age-old mistake. Making your screen name when you're that young. Hopefully you can find a way to change it. The light gentle touch surprised him, and sent an electric flutter through his belly, an unexpected flush of warmth that led him to feeling confused and uncertain. He managed to keep his reaction from showing, but just barely. Ada continued, frowning thoughtfully. How about this? Help me with the manhole cover, and let's see what's down there. If it looks dangerous, I'll come with you. But if it's not bad, well, we can talk about what to do next. He wanted to protest, but the truth was he couldn't make her do anything she didn't want to do. And he wanted very much for her to know that he wasn't some overbearing macho type, that he was receptive to compromise. And does the name John ring a bell? This isn't a date, for Christ's sake. Stop thinking with your hormones. Feeling awkward, even thinking about it, with her hand still on his arm, Leon stepped away, nodding briskly. Together they crouched down next to the manhole. Leon picked up the crowbar and jammed one end in the lid. As he pulled back, Ada pushed on the bar. With a heavy, grating sound, the thick metal plate came up. Leon put his back into it and heaved the lid to one side, clearing the opening. And both of them recoiled from the smell that bellowed out of the dark hole, a choking dark stench of blood and piss and vomit. God, what is that? Leon coughed. Ada sat back on her heels, one hand pressed to her mouth. The bodies from the garage, they must have been dumped down here. The bodies from the garage, they must have dumped them down here. Before he could ask what she was talking about, a stream of pure terror echoed through the basement halls, flittering through the closed door. The cry went on in the man's voice, the panic scream, the sudden changing of a gurgling shriek of pain. Scream suddenly changing to a gurgling shriek of pain. The reporter. Leon locked gazes with Ada, saw the same startled realization flash across her face, and then they were both up and running, pulling out their weapons and sprinting through the door before the echoes died. I left him. I shouldn't have left him. They ran down the corridor for the cell block, guilt driving Leon faster and faster as though he could, faster than he thought he could. I am not reading things, am I? Someone or something had gotten to Bertolucci, and I passed right behind his back to do it. Sherry stood in Mr. Iron's office, rubbing at her good luck pendant and wishing that Claire would come back. She had crawled through a dozen dusty tunnels to get away from the monster and lead it away from Claire, and she was pretty sure it had worked. She hadn't heard it again, and had come back to find Claire had left. If the monster had found her, she would have been dead and ripped apart. But she's not here. Nobody is. Sherry sat on the ledge of the low table in the middle of the room, wondering what she should do. She'd gotten pretty used to being alone, and hadn't even realized how lonely she had been, but meeting Claire had changed that. Sherry wanted to see her again. She wanted to be with other people. She wanted her parents so bad that it made her ache. Even Mr. Irons would be okay, although Sherry didn't like him. She only met him a couple of times, but he was weird, showy, and fake. And his office was creepy besides. Still, she'd gladly put up with him if it meant she didn't have to be alone anymore. Footsteps. In the hall outside the office. Sherry stood up and ran to the door that led back to the armor room, hoping it was Claire and ready to sprint for cover if it wasn't. She ducked around the door frame and held her breath, staring at the stuffed tiger in the hall and silently praying. The outer door opened and closed, muffled steps on carpet moving slowly, and she tensed to run, at the same time trying to muster up enough courage to sneak a look. Sherry? Claire! I'm here! She ran back to the office, and there was Claire. Her whole face lit up with a beaming smile. Sherry flew into her open arms, so happy to see her that she wanted to cry. I was looking for you, Claire said, holding her tightly. Don't run off like that again, okay? Claire not in front of her, still smiling, but Sherry could see the worry behind her smile and her cool gray eyes. I'm sorry, Sherry said. I had to, or the monster would have come. What does it look like? Claire asked, her smile fading. Does it look kind of red with claws? Sherry swallowed heavily. The inside-out men. You saw one, didn't you? Incredibly, Claire grinned, shaking her head. Yeah, that's exactly what I saw, an inside-out man. Good description. She looked at Sherry more seriously, frowning. Men? There are more of them? Sherry nodded. Yes, but they aren't anything like the monster. I only saw him once from behind, but he's a man, a giant man. Claire seemed excited. Bald? Wearing a long coat? No, he had hair, brown hair, and one of his arms was screwed up a lot longer than the other one. Claire sighed. Terrific. Raccoon's got something for everyone, it sounds like. She reached out and took Sherry's hand, squeezing it. And I think that's more the reason you should stay with me. You've done a really good job of taking care of yourself, and you've been very brave, but until we find your parents, I feel like it's my job to watch out for you. If the monster comes, I'll kick its ass, okay? Sherry laughed, surprised into it. She liked that Claire didn't talk down to her. She nodded and Claire squeezed her hand again. Good. So we've got zombies, inside-out men, and a monster. And a big bald guy. Sherry, do you know what happened to Raccoon? How this all got started? Anything you could tell me, anything at all, it could be important. Sherry frowned, thinking. Well, there were a bunch of murders last May or June, I think. Like 10 people got killed. And then they stopped, but then maybe a week ago, somebody got attacked. Claire nodded encouragingly. Okay, did more people start getting attacked, or what did the police do? Sherry shook her head, wishing she could be more helpful. I don't know. Right before that girl got attacked, my mother called me from work, called from work really upset, and told me that I couldn't leave the house. Mrs. Willis, that's our next-door neighbor, she came over and cooked dinner for me, and that's how I heard about that girl. Mom called me again the next day and told me that she and Dad were stuck at the plant and wouldn't be home for a while. And then like 3 days ago, she called again and told me to come here. I went to see Mrs. Willis would come with me, but her house was dark and empty. I guess things had already gotten pretty bad by then. Claire was staring at her intently. You were alone all years, and that you've made it this far means that you're also very strong. That's good because we're both going to have to be strong to make it out of here. Sherry felt her eyes go wide. What do you mean? Leave the station? But there are zombies all over the place, and I don't know where my parents are, and what if they need my help, or they're looking for me? Sweetie, I'm sure your folks are just fine, Claire said quickly. They're probably still at the plant, hiding and safe, just like you were, waiting for people to come from the outside city to make everything better. You mean kill everything, Sherry said. I'm 12, you know, not a baby. Claire smiled. Sorry. Yeah, to kill everything. But until the good guys come, we're on our own. And the best thing we can do, the smart thing, is to get out of their way. To get as far out of their way as possible. You're right, the streets aren't safe, but maybe we can get a car. It was Claire's turn to trail off. She stood up and walked towards a big desk at the far end of the office, looking around as she went. Maybe Chief Irons left his car keys here, or another weapon, or something we can use. Claire saw something on the floor behind the desk. She crouched down and Sherry hurried after her, as much to stay close as to see what she found. Sherry knew that she didn't want to lose her again, no matter what else happened. "There's blood here," Claire said softly. So softly that Sherry thought she hadn't meant to say it aloud. "So?" "Your thing just crashed. Why, we tried turning it off and then on again." Claire looked up at the plain tan wall, frowning, and then back down at the drying splotch of red on the floor. "It's still wet for one thing. And see the way it just kind of cut off? There should be something on the wall here." She rapped on a dark wood trim that lined the wall, then the wall itself. There was an obvious difference, a dull thump from the trim, but the wall sounded hollow. "There's a room back there?" Sherry asked. "I don't know. It sounds like it. And it would explain where he took off to earlier. Chief Irons." She glanced up at Sherry and started to feel along the baseboards, running her hands up the wall and pushing at it. "Sherry, look around the desk, see if you can find the switch or a lever. My guess is it would be very well hidden somewhere. Maybe in one of the drawers." Sherry started to move behind the desk and tripped, her foot finding slightly on a handful of pencils that she hadn't seen. She grabbed at the desk trying to catch her balance, but still came down pretty hard on her bare knees. "Ow!" Claire was next to her right away, putting an arm around her shoulders. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, Hey, look!" Her bruised knee forgotten, Sherry pointed to the switch under the top drawer of the desk, set into a small metal plate. It looked like a light switch, but it had to be for that secret door. She just knew it. "I found it!" Claire reached out and flipped the switch, and behind them, a section of the wall a few feet across slid smoothly upwards, disappearing into the ceiling, and exposing a dimly lit room lined with oversized bricks. Cool, damp air breezed into the office, and it was a secret passage, just like in the movies. Together they stood and stepped towards the opening, Claire holding Sherry back with one arm until she looked first. The small room was totally empty. 3 brick walls and a stained wood floor, and only about half the size of the office. The 4th wall was dominated by a big, old-fashioned elevator gate, the kind that pushed to one side. Sherry as Velma, that's an interesting combination. "Are we going to take it?" Sherry asked. She was excited but nervous too. Claire had taken her gun out. She crouched down next to Sherry and smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile, and Sherry knew what was coming before Claire said a word. "Sweetie, I think it would be safest if I went off and looked around first, and you stayed here." "But you said we would stick together. You said we could find a car and leave. What if the monster comes back and you're not here, or you get killed?" Claire hugged her, but Sherry felt almost sick with helpless anger. She was going to tell her not to worry, that the monster wouldn't come, that nothing bad would happen, and that she was going to leave anyway. Stupid grown-up lies. Stupid grown-up lies. That was what she did. Claire leaned back, smoothing over Sherry's hair away from her face. "I don't blame you for being scared. I'm scared too. This is a bad situation, and honestly, I don't know what's going to happen. But I want to do the right thing by you, and that means I'm not going to take you into a situation where you could get hurt, not if I can't help it." Sherry swallowed back tears, trying again. "But I want to come with you. What if you don't come back?" "I'm going to come back," Claire said firmly. "I promise. And if I don't, I want you to hide again, like before. Somebody will come. Help is going to come soon, and they'll find you." At least she was being honest. Sherry didn't like it, not at all, but at least there was that. And from the look on her face, Sherry could see that there was nothing that she could say to change her mind. She could be a baby about it, or she could accept it. Be careful, she whispered. "Be careful," she whispered, and Claire hugged her again before standing and moving towards the elevator. She pushed a button next to the gate, and there was a low, soft hum. Before a few seconds, an elevator car rose into view, coming to a gentle stop. Claire pulled the gate open and stepped inside, turning a last look at Sherry. "Stay here, sweetie," she said. "I'll be back in a few minutes." I've not heard of Ryan's Babe or Neil Breen, so I don't know. Maybe, Luke, maybe not. Okay, I was wondering. I thought my screen froze, but I just apparently hold unnaturally still. Sherry forced herself to nod, and Claire let the gate close. She touched something inside the elevator, and the car went down, her smiling, strong face ascending out of sight, leaving Sherry by herself in the cold, dark passage. Sherry sat down on the dusty floor and hugged her knees close to her body, rocking herself slowly. Claire was brave and smart, and she'd be back soon. She had to come back soon. "I want my mommy," Sherry whispered, but there was nobody to hear her. She was alone again, the thing she wanted the least of all. "But I'm strong. I'm strong, and I can wait." She rested her chin on one knee, touching the necklace her mother had given her for good luck, and started to wait for Claire to come back. Chapter 16. Annette Birkin sat in the laboratory monitor room, exhausted, staring up the wall video screen centered around the surveillance console. She'd been there for what felt like years, waiting for William to appear, and was starting to think that he never would. She'd give it a little longer, but if she didn't see him soon, she'd have to do another search. God damn it, technology. It was a brand new system, less than a month old. 25 screens with a channel control that should have allowed her to see any and every part of the facility. A brilliant security advance, except only 11 of the screens still worked at all, and over half of those would only show static, an endless dance of electric snow. Of the 5 she could still get a clear picture from, all she could see, all there was to see, were dead, rotting bodies and the occasional RD3, either feasting or sleeping. Lickers. You call them lickers because of their tongues. You called them lickers because of their tongue. She thought she'd been past the worst of the pain, but the lonely sound of her own voice in the cold, cavernous chamber, and the realization that there would be no answer, that there would never be an answer again, brought on a fresh, knifing wave of grief. William was gone. He was gone, and she was talking to no one at all. Annette lowered her head to the console, closing her weary eyes. At least there were no more tears. She wept an ocean of them in the days since the umbrella had come for the G-Virus, but it was simply too spent to cry anymore. Now there was only pain, interspersed with a fit of violent, helpless fury over what Umbrella had done. Another month, maybe 2, and we would have given it to them. We would have turned it over without a fight, and William would have made the executive board, and we would have been happy. Everyone would have been happy. There was a faint squealing from one of the muted security screens. One of the muted security screens? That's weird. And I looked up and hoping and dreading at once, but it was just a licker one floor up in the surgical bay. It had dropped from the ceiling roost to snack on one of the techs, howling stupidly to itself as it ripped into the corpse's guts. The dead man looked like Don Weller, one of the chemical plant go-betweens, but she couldn't tell for certain. He was almost as mutilated and human looking as the rest of the RE2s that as the RE2 that was eating him. She watched the liquor feed, watched the small screen, but didn't really see. Her mind wandered, running over what was left for her to do. She already wiped all the computers, but unlocked all the countdown codes. The lab was ready, and her escape route was secured. But she couldn't finish things until she saw him again. He was back in the Umbrella facility. Destroying the lab wouldn't solve anything if he wasn't in the blast zone. They would find him and extract the virus from his blood. And Umbrella won't have it. I'll die before I let them have it, so help me God. Falcon Knight, not Fallen Knight. My apologies. Her only consolation in all this mad, horrible affair was that Umbrella hadn't managed to get their greedy hands on William's synthesis. They hadn't and never would. Everything that had gone into the creation of the G-Virus would be buried under 1,000 burning tons of stone and wood, along with William and all the other monsters that they had created for the company. She would go into hiding for a while, take some time to heal and consider her options, and then she would sell the G-Virus to the competition. Umbrella was the biggest, but they weren't the only conglomerate working on bioweapon research, and when she thought of them, And when she was through with them, they wouldn't be the biggest anymore. It wasn't much of a revenge, but it was all she had left. Except for Sherry, Annette whispered, and the thought of their youngest daughter made her heart ache. A different pain, but a pain nonetheless. Since the day Sherry had been born, Annette had meant to spend more time with her, to focus on the child instead of on her part in William's brilliant work. And yet, somehow the years had slipped by. William's promotions had kept coming, and the work had grown ever more interesting and valuable. And although both she and William had made promises to themselves and each other that they would make more of an effort to develop their family life, they had continued to put it off. Oh, that was already on. I'm figuring at the end of this chapter I'll turn my lights on and close the blinds. And now it's too late. We'll never be a family. We'll never be parents together. All that time wasted slaving for a company that sold us out in the end. It was too late. There was no point in mourning what could have been. All she could do now was make sure that Umbrella wouldn't get anything else from the Birkin family. William was gone, but there was still Sherry. That part of him would go on, and Annette meant to finally become the mother she should have been all along. Of course, she'd have waited until things had cooled down before she could collect Sherry, at least a few months, but the girl would be safe. The cops would send her to live with William's sister. It was in both their wills. Unless Irons is still alive. That fat, greedy bastard could find a way to screw up even that if given half a chance. She hoped he was dead. Even if he wasn't directly responsible for Umbrella's awareness of the G virus, Brian Irons was a disgusting, arrogant man with morals of a sea slug. After years of loyalty to the company, he'd been bought out for a measly $100,000. Even William had been surprised, and he'd had even a lower opinion of the police chief than she had. On the screen, the RE3 finished its meal. For the record, RE3s are the liquors. It's weird, in this version of the continuity, the liquors are created beings. They are not evolved beings like they are in actual canon. Because in the actual canon, zombies eventually become liquors, and they have go-between stages, like it becoming Crimson Heads, then becoming proto-liquors, which you see in Resident Evil Outbreak, and then they become full-on liquors. If you leave a zombie alone long enough, they will become that. On the screen, the RE3 had finished its meal. All that was left of the dead man was an empty shell, arched, bloody ribs, and a faceless cup of a skull. The surely vibrant colors lost to the video's flat shades of gray. The liquor scrabbled out of view, trailing stickly foods in its wake. Thanks to the T-Virus, all the reptile series were efficient killers, although the threes had design flaws. The protruding cerebrum was the most obvious, but they also had a ridiculously high metabolic rate. Keeping them fed had been a constant hassle. Not a problem anymore. Plenty of carrion to go around, and lucky them, they'll get their chance of a hot dinner soon enough. Annette felt drained of energy. She didn't want to go back into the facility, but she couldn't just keep hoping that William would happen by one of the working cameras. She'd heard him up on level 3, perhaps 2 days ago, but she hadn't seen him in almost twice as long. She couldn't keep waiting. Umbrella people were probably already working on a way in. Even with the mainframe wiped, there was other ways to get past the doors. And William may have found a way out. I can't keep denying it, no matter how much I want to. There was an abandoned factory west of the lab, a shipping company that had been bought up by Umbrella to ensure that the underground levels would stay secret. It was how Umbrella had managed to build a complex in the first place without arousing suspicion, hiding equipment and materials in the factory's warehouses, and using the heavy machinery to lift transport them. Although the entrances from the factory had been sealed off the last time she'd checked, there was a slim chance that William had gotten through, and if he could get through the factory, he could get into the sewers. Annette forced herself to stand up, ignoring the cramps in her legs and back as she picked up the handgun on the console. She didn't know how much about guns, although she figured out how to use one quickly enough. After they came for the G virus, the men in the gas masks shooting and running, and William, poor William, dying in a puddle of blood, and I didn't see the syringe until it was too late. She took a deep shuddering breath, trying to push that terrible memory aside, trying to forget about the incident that had taken William from her and turned Raccoon into a city of the dead. Roll credits. It didn't matter anymore. The journey ahead wouldn't be a pleasant one, and she had to concentrate. Escaped RE3s, first and second stage infected humans, the botany experiments, the Arachnid series. She could run into any of the T-virus carriers, not to mention whomever Umbrella had managed to send. And William, my husband, my beloved, the first human G-virus carrier who isn't really human anymore. Again, difference from continuity. The G-virus had been tested on humans, apparently, in the new game. She'd been wrong to think that there had been no more tears inside. Annette stood in the middle of the vast, sterile room, 5 floors beneath the surface of Raccoon, and wept lost, racking sobs that didn't even begin to touch the pain of her loneliness. Umbrella would be sorry. Once she could be sure that William was beyond their reach, she was going to destroy their precious facility. She was going to take the G-virus and run, and she was going to make sure that they understood how badly they screwed up, and God help anyone who tried to stop her. Next is Chapter 17. I'm going to close my blinds and turn on a light and take a little sip, because I'm thirsty. Ugh. Get out from under there. Just record. Gotta love that water. Goes down smooth. Okay. Let's kick this back into high gear, shall we? Chapter 17. Ada ran into the cell block, only a step behind Leon, just in time to see the reporter stumble out of his cage and fall to the floor. "Help him!" Leon shouted, and ran past Bertolucci to check the cell. Ada stopped in front of the gasping reporter, but she ignored his command, waiting to see if whatever had gotten him was going to spread out in the open cell. He was behind bars. How did this happen? She waited, weapon pointed after Leon had leapt in front of the open cell, her heart pounding, and saw the bewildered look on his youthful face, the open surprise. The way his gaze searched the cell told her that it was empty, unless the attacker was invisible. Not a chance. Don't even start thinking like that. Don't let it get to you. Ada knelt down next to the reporter, taking in immediately that he was in a bad way. Dying bad. He'd crumpled up into a half-sitting position, his head against the bars of the cell to adjust adjacent to his. He was still breathing, but it wouldn't be long before he stopped. Ada had seen that look before, the far-seeing gaze, the trembling, the pallor. But what she didn't see was how, and that scared her. There were no wounds. It had to have been a heart attack, maybe a stroke. But that scream! Ben, what happened? His flickering gaze fixed on her face, and she saw that the corners of his mouth were cracked and bleeding. He opened his mouth to speak, but all that came out was a rasping, unintelligible croak. Leon crouched down next to them, looking as confused as she felt. He shook his head at her, in an unspoken answer to her unasked question. There was apparently no sign of what had happened. Ada looked down at Bertolucci and tried again. "What was it, Ben? Can you tell us what happened?" The reporter's shaking hand crawled up his body, his hand resting across his chest. With a visible effort, he managed to whisper a single word. "Window." Ada wasn't reassured. The cell's window was barely a foot across, maybe 6 inches wide, and set 8 feet off the cell floor. Nothing more than a ventilation hole that opened into the parking garage. Nothing could have gotten through, at least nothing that she had heard of or read about, and that meant that there were dangers she wasn't prepared against. Bertolucci was trying to speak. Both Ada and Leon leaned closer, straining to catch his painful whispers. "Chest burns. It burns." Ada relaxed just a bit. He'd seen or heard something outside the cell, something that had kicked off a massive coronary. That she could accept. A pisser for a journalist, but it would save her the trouble of killing him herself. He reached out, suddenly grasping her forearm, staring up at her with an intensity that surprised her. His grip was weak, but there was a desperation in his wet eyes. Desperation and some frustrated sorrow that inspired not a little guilt from what she had been thinking. "I never told about Irons," he breathed, obviously struggling to hang onto life and get it all out. "He's working for Umbrella all this time. The zombies are Umbrella research, and he covered up the murders, but I couldn't prove it at all, yet was going to be my exclusive." Bertolucci closed his bruised-looking eyelids, breathing shallowly as his fingers fell away from her arms. She felt a surge of pity for him in spite of herself. The poor dumb jerk. His big secret was that Umbrella was into bioweapons, and that Irons was on the take. It would have been a big scoop, too, but apparently he hadn't even been able to get hard evidence. "He doesn't know dick about the G-virus. He never did. And he's going to die regardless. Talk about a shit deal." "Jesus," Leon said softly. "Chief Irons?" Ada had all but forgotten how clueless the young cop was. He was obviously new, but a couple of times he'd seemed so perceptive that she'd been taken aback. The kid wasn't just a testosterone case. There was definitely something going on upstairs. "Knock it off already. He's not much younger than you. The reporter's about to kick it, and you need to be on your way, not worrying about Officer Friendly." Bertolucci spasmed suddenly, his hands clutching at his chest as he moaned a sharp, tortured cry of agony. His back arched, his fingers hooked into claws, and the moan went liquid as blood started to stream from his mouth in a burbling gout. Choking and shrieking, Bertolucci's limbs convulsed violently, droplets of crimson spraying out from each cracking cough. And Ada saw red blossom across his rumpled white shirt, beneath his scrabbling hands, and heard the thick, wet crack of breaking bone. She leapt back as Leon grabbed for the reporter's hands, not sure what was happening, but absolutely positive that it was not a heart attack. "Holy Christ, what is this?" And more Ada voices. "Holy crap, what is this? Holy Christ, what?" I can't do women's voices. All at once, Bertolucci went limp, his eyes rolled back and fixed, sightless. Blood still oozed from his cracked lips, and there was a horrible sound of meat being torn, and under the strained fabric of his shirt something moved. "Get back!" Ada shouted, pointing her Beretta at the dead reporter, and in a split second it took her to aim. A thing erupted from Bertolucci's body. Bloody chest. Not body, bloody chest. A thing the size of a man's fist, a gore-drenched thing that opened a tiny black hole of a mouth and squealed shrilly, revealing nubs of sharp red teeth. It wriggled out of the corpse with whipping mantis tail, splashing the cold cement with threads of wet tissue and gut. Lashing against the cooling flesh of the reporter, it poured from the body in a gush of blood and onto the floor, and took off like a shot for the open gate at the back into the hall, propelling itself with its snaking tail and legs that Ada couldn't see, smearing a red path behind it. It was out the door before she even remembered what she was holding a gun. For the first time since she'd come to the Raccoon, since ever, she'd been so completely shocked that she hadn't thought to react. A chest-bursting parasitic creature straight out of a sci-fi movie. "Was that... Did you see?" Leon fumbled breathlessly. "I saw it," Ada said, softly, cutting him off. And she turned and looked down at Bertolucci, at his face frozen in a bloody contortion of anguish, and the gaping white cavity just below his sternum. His mouth cracked at the corners. He'd been implanted with the creature, by what she didn't know, and she didn't want to know. What she wanted was to get the mission wrapped as quickly as possible, and then get as far from Raccoon City as she could. In fact, she thought she'd never wanted anything quite so badly. When she first realized that there had been a T-virus incident, she expected to have to deal with some kind of unpleasant organisms. But the thought of having one of them forced or forcing its way down her throat, nestling inside of her body like some kind of slick, aberrant fetus before eating its way out. If that wasn't the most horrible thing she could think of, it ran close. "I'm getting out of here," she said, and without waiting for a response, she turned and walked briskly towards the gate, careful not to step on the glistening trail of blood that the tiny monster had created. "Wait, look, I think... Ada, hey!" She stepped into the corridor, weapon raised, but the creature was gone. The blood trail petered out less than halfway down the hall, but she saw that they had left the door open to the kennel, open, and the manhole covers off. Terrific. Leon caught up to her before she'd gone more than a few steps. He stood in front of her, blocking her path for just a moment. Ada thought he was going to try and physically stop her. "Don't do it. I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." "Ada, please don't go," Leon said, not a command but a plea. When I got to Raccoon, I met this girl, and I think she's in the station somewhere. If you could help me find her, the three of us could leave together. We stand a much better chance." "Sorry, Leon, but it's a free goddamn country. You do what you have to, and good luck, but I'm not staying. I've had enough. When I get out, I'll send help." She started to push past him, hoping it wouldn't come to violence, and wishing that she could tell him not to get in her way, how dangerous it would be for him to try, when Leon surprised her yet again. "Then I'm coming with you," he said. He met her gaze evenly, his own unflinching and resolute, and scared. "I'm not going to let you do it alone. I don't want anyone else... I don't want you to get hurt." Ada stared at him, not sure what to say. Now that Bertolucci was dead, she didn't want to have to ditch Leon in the sewers. It wouldn't be hard, considering how extensive the system was. But he was just so goddamn nice, so determined to be helpful that she was starting to not want to have anything bad, want to do anything bad to him. Things would be a lot easier if he was just some asshole on a machismo kick. "Okay, so blow your cover. Tell him you're a private agent working to steal the G-virus and you don't want company. Tell him about the relief you felt when you realized the reporter was about to die, or how you don't have a problem with killing, if it's for a good cause, like getting paid. See how nice and helpful he is after that." Not an option. Neither was trying to talk him out of coming along. It wouldn't make sense. And there were some parts of her, some part that she didn't want to admit to, that she wanted very much not to be alone. Seeing that things had popped out of Bertolucci had shaken her. It had left her feeling that she wasn't as invulnerable as she liked to think. "So let him come, get to the lab, find a safe place to leave him there. No harm, no foul." Leon was watching her closely, studying her, waiting for her approval. "Let's go," she said, and the grin he gave her, though winning, made her feel even more uncomfortable. Without another word, they walked towards the kennel, Ada wondering what the hell she was doing, and whether or not she was still capable of doing whatever it took to get the job done. Claire stood in front of a medieval door at the very end of the dark dungeon-like hallway that the elevator had taken her to. The station had been chilly, but the icy damp of the stone hall made the station seem like summer. It was like she'd descended into some ancient haunted castle straight out of the Middle Ages. She took a deep breath, trying to decide how to go in. She was pretty sure that Irons wouldn't appreciate a surprise visit, but the idea of knocking seemed ludicrous, not to mention dangerous. There were torches burning in sconces on either side of the heavy wooden door, the door itself belted with strips of rusty metal. And if she had any doubt before that Irons was crazy, the sight of the twin sputtering torches and the feel of cold, quiet dread that suffused the corridor itself had wiped her uncertainty out. A secret tunnel, a hidden room, complete with mood lighting? What sane person would want to hang out down here? It wasn't the disaster that did it. Irons must have been nuts way before Umbrella's accident. Another certainty, although she didn't have any proof. But when Sherry had told her about what her parents did for a living, and that what had happened just prior to her coming to the station, something had clicked. Umbrella worked with diseases, and the population of Raccoon had definitely come down with a bad case of something. There must have been some kind of accident, a spill that had released the strange zombie plague. Quit stalling. Claire bit her lip, not sure what she should do. She didn't doubt that Irons was down here somewhere, and she did not want to run into him again. Maybe she should go back up, get Sherry, and try to find another way out. Just because the area was secret didn't mean that it was some kind of escape route. Still stalling, and Sherry is up there by herself, and you've got a gun, remember? A gun with very little ammo. If this was Irons' hidden lair, maybe he kept a weapon inside. Or maybe it was just another corridor, one that led even deeper into the bowels of the station. Either way, wondering about it was telling her exactly jack shit. Claire put her hand on the latch, took another deep breath, and pushed it open. The heavy door swinging in slowly on well-oiled hinges. She stepped back, pointing the handgun. Jesus. An empty room, as dank and unwelcoming as the corridor, but with the furnishings and decor that made her skin crawl. A single naked bulb hung down from the ceiling, illuminating the creepiest chamber she'd ever seen. There was a table in the middle of the room, stained and battered, a hacksaw and some cutting utensils scattered on top, a dented metal bucket and a mop, slopped against one water-stained wall, and next to a portable basin with the dried red patches inside. Shelves laden with dusty bottles and what looked like human bones, polished and pale, set out like macabre trophies. That and the smell, a thick chemical reek, sharp and acidic, that only just covered the darker smell. A smell like insanity. Even looking into the room made her, want to be sick. Nuts was maybe an understatement of the year for the police chief. But there was nobody home, and that meant that there could be another secret passage somewhere inside. Or at the very least, she had to check for weapons. Swallowing, Claire stepped into the room, glad that she hadn't brought Sherry with her. Looking at the private little torture chamber was going to give her nightmares. It was going to expose, it was nothing to expose a child to. Freeze, little girl, or I'll shoot you where you... Freeze, little girl, or I'll shoot you where you stand. Claire froze. Every muscle in her body froze as Iron started to laugh from behind her. From behind the door where she had gone, she hadn't thought to look. Oh my god, oh my god, oh god, Sherry, I'm so sorry. Iron's deep chuckle rose to a hearty, gleeful laughter of a madman, and Claire was understood that she was going to die. Okay. Making sure, just checking how many chapters we've got going. Want to try and get up through at least 20, maybe more. Chapter 18. Trying not to breathe too deeply, Leon reached the bottom of the metal ladder and turned around quickly, aiming the magnum into the thick gloom. Murky water sloshed over his boots. As his eyes adjusted to the low light, he saw the source of the terrible smell. Parts of it, anyway. The sub-basement tunnel stretching out in front of him was littered with body parts, human corpses that had been torn into pieces. Limbs and heads and torsos were strewn randomly across the stone passage, lapped at gently by a few inches of dark water that covered the floor. Leon, how is it? Ada's voice floated down from the circle of light above the ladder, echoing hollowly around him. Leon didn't answer, his shocked gaze fixed on the terrible scene. His brain tried to add up the shredded parts and come up with a number. How many? How many people? Too many to count. He saw a faceless head, the long hair streaming down around it in a cloud. A heavy woman's decapitated trunk, one breast bobbing in above the rippling darkness, an arm encased in tatters of a cop's dress, a bare leg still wearing a sneaker, a curled hand, the fingers slick and white. A dozen? 20? Leon? Ada's tone had sharpened. It looks okay, he called, struggling to keep his voice from cracking. Nothing moving. I'm coming down. She stepped away from the ladder to give. He stepped away from the ladder to give her room, remembering something she said before, something about bodies being dumped. Ada stepped off the bottom rung, splashing into the dark tunnel. His eyes had adjusted well enough to see the look of disgust cross her delicate features. Disgust and something like sadness. There was an attack in the garage, she said softly. 14 or 15 people died. Oh. Okay, let me get to that. She trailed off, frowning, and took a step past him to get a closer look at the severed and mutilated remains. When she spoke again, she sounded worried. I didn't see the attack, but I don't think they were torn up like this. She looked up, scanning the roof of the tunnel, gripping her 9mm tightly. Leon followed her gaze, but only saw an algae-thick stone. Ada shook her head, looking back down at the gently rippling sea of broken flesh. The zombies didn't do this. Something got to these people after they were killed. So it's not safe down here. We should head back up, and... Ada started forward, stepping through the tangled limbs, the sound of her careful, sloshing movements seeming very loud in the otherwise silent tunnel. Damn, does she ignore everybody, or is it just me? Watching his steps, Leon followed, reaching out with a free hand to touch her shoulder. At least let me go first. Fine, she said, sounding almost but not quite exasperated. Lead the way. He stepped in front of her, and they started forward again. Leon trying to divide his attention between the darkness ahead and the sodden pieces of flesh and bone underfoot. Just ahead, the tunnel turned to the right, and there was some light reflected off the oily surface of the water. The passage was clearer, too, with not as many bodies. Leon paused just long enough to unholster the Remington, checking to make sure that he'd chambered around. Whatever had gotten to the corpses didn't seem to be around, but he didn't want to be unprepared if it came back. Ada waited without speaking, although he could feel her impatience. Not for the first time, he wondered if there was more to her story than she told him. He was scared, and he also was also cold and tired and afraid for Claire, who might still be wandering the station. He didn't know if Claire was still alive, but he hadn't felt right letting Ada walk into a bad situation on her own. Ada, on the other hand, she was as calm and as controlled as a veteran soldier, expressing nothing but a kind of irritable eagerness to get on with things. And if she appreciated his presence at all, she was taking great pains not to show it. It wasn't that he needed or wanted her gratitude, but wouldn't most people be happy to have a cop along, even a rookie? Maybe not. It wasn't time or place to start asking questions. Leon shut down his thinking and started to move again, stepping gingerly over the chewed-up chunk of flesh that he couldn't identify. Stop, Ada whispered sharply. Listen. Leon tensed, Remington in one hand, Magnum in the other. He tilted his head, straining to hear, but there was only a distant hollow drip of water. And a soft thumping. A rapid but random sound like padded hammers on padded surface. Whatever it was getting close, coming towards them from where the tunnel turned up ahead. Why isn't it splashing? Why don't we hear water? Leon backed up a step, raising both weapons slightly, remembering how Ada had looked at the ceiling before, and saw it. Saw it and felt his heart stop in a mid-beat. A spider, the size of a dog, skittering over the wet stone halfway across the inner walls, its bristling hairy legs tapping. Not possible. And there was a series of deafening explosions next to his right ear. Bam! 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 The muzzle flash from Ada's Beretta, strobing the hellish tunnel as she fired. The booming echoes pounded through the dark as the giant, impossible arachnid dropped from the wall, splashing into the inky water. It crawled towards them, wounded, dragging two of its multiple legs through the murk behind it. Dark fluid spilling out from its grotesque, rounded body. It humped itself over a human head, the mutilated skull rolling out from beneath the swollen, pulsing abdomen. And Leon could see its shining black eyes, each one the size of a ping-pong ball. And he squeezed the trigger on the Remington, not even feeling a kick from the thundering blast. His entire focus on the inconceivable arachnid. The round hit squarely, blowing off its alien face into 1,000 wet pieces. The spider flipped over backwards with a skidding splash, its thick legs quivering, curling over its furred body. Hearing its ringing, his heart pounding, Leon chambered another round, his mind telling him that they had not just blown away a spider that big. The physics was wrong. It couldn't happen because it wouldn't collapse. It would collapse under its own weight. Ada pushed past him, running ahead, shouting back to him, "Come on! There could be more coming!" Leon took off after her, forced by Ada's reckless behavior to put his shock on hold. He sprinted through the dark, jumping over the disturbed and gently rocking hunks of flesh, past the closed dead spider that should never have existed in the reality that he'd known before Raccoon City. "Drop your weapon," Irons commanded, and the girl did so, hesitating for only a second. The Browning clattered to the floor, and Irons had to resist the urge to laugh again, scarcely able to credit how stupidly she acted. The umbrella assassin had obviously grown arrogant, walking into a sanctuary as if she owned the place, and her smug, inflated conceit had only cost her the game. "Turn around slow, and keep your hands where I can see them," he said, still grinning. Oh, what a glorious easy conquest. Umbrella had underestimated him for the last time. Again, the girl did as he asked, pivoting slowly, her hands empty and open. The look on her face was priceless, her aquiline features fixed in a mask of fear and shock. She hadn't expected this. She thought it would be a simple task to take Brian Irons. After all, he was a broken man, a shadow of his former self, his city, his life taken away. "Mistaken, weren't you?" he said, feeling the humor leak out of his situation, feeling the anger stirring again. He kept the VP-70 trained on her ridiculous young face, insulting that they had sent a child to do their dirty work, even such a pretty one. "Calm down, Chief Irons," she said, and even angry, he was pleased to hear the strain in her sultry voice, the edge of fear beneath her useless plea. He was going to enjoy this, even more than he had imagined. But first, some answers. "Who sent you? Was it Coleman from headquarters? Or did your orders come from higher up? Someone on the board, perhaps? There's no point in lying, not anymore." The girl stared at him, her eyes wide with feigned confusion. I don't know what you're talking about. Please, there's been some kind of mistake." "Oh, there's been a mistake, all right," Irons spat. "And you made it. How long has Umbrella been watching me? What were your orders exactly? Were you supposed to kill me outright, or did Umbrella want you to see me suffer a little more first?" The girl didn't answer for a moment, obviously trying to decide how much to tell him. She was good, her expression still carefully arranged to show only bewildered fear, but he saw right through it. She's been caught. She must know that I won't let her live, and she's going to try and conceal the truth even now. Young, but well-trained. "I came to Raccoon looking for my brother," she said, her wide gray eyes fixed on the gun. "He was with Stars, and I just..." "Stars? Is that the best you can do?" Irons laughed bitterly, shaking his head. The Raccoon Stars had fled well before things had fallen to shit, and at last he'd heard Umbrella had already converted the organization to their purposes, and was working to eliminate those who wouldn't cross over. As a cover story, it didn't play. But there is something. He narrowed his eyes, studying her pale, anxious face. "And just who is your brother?" "Chris Redfield. You know him. I'm Claire, his sister. And I don't know anything about whatever Umbrella did, and I wasn't sent here to kill you." She spoke quickly, all but stumbling over herself to get her story out. She did look like Redfield, though her eyes at least. Although why she thought that connection would help her somehow was beyond him. Chris Redfield was a pompous, disrespectful upstart who had openly defied him many times. In fact, Redfield, I was working for Umbrella. Redfield was working for Umbrella, wasn't he? Even saying it aloud, Irons could see that was the truth, and his anger swelled up like a red tide. An acid heat flushed through his veins and made him feel sick. Even my employees, all along, treasonous Umbrella puppets. The Spencer estate, the accusations against Umbrella, that was all a setup. They had him stirring trouble to distract me so they could steal Birkin's new virus. Oh, I do try. Voices are my favorite thing to do. I adore voice acting. Irons took a step closer to the girl, barely able to keep himself from pulling the trigger in spite of his plans. The girl, Claire, took a step back, holding up her hands, palms out, as if to ward off the righteous fury. That's how the stars knew how to get out of town, he snarled. They were warned to get out of town before the T-virus leak. He took another step forward, but Claire had stopped, her eyes going even wider. You mean Chris isn't here? Her small, hopeful whisper only fed the red, burning heat that had pounded through him. And the feelings were so powerful that they transcended rage, focusing his intentions into something brutal and precise. It wasn't enough that he'd been betrayed by Umbrella and the stars. It wasn't enough that he'd been manipulated, tormented, hunted. No. I've been lied to by this little girl, a spy and an assassin from a family of traitors, a lifetime of devoted service, a lifetime of hard-won experience, and self-sacrifice, and this is my reward? A slap to the face, he said, his voice as cold as his new savagery that filled him up and transformed him into the hunter. Treat me like an idiot. You don't even have enough respect to lie well. He extended the 9mm and walked towards her, each step measured and deliberate, and her fear was real this time. He could see it in the way that she stumbled back, her lips trembling, her young chest heaving in a most delicious way. She was terrified, trying to look for a weapon and watch him and get away at all the. She was trying to look for a weapon and watch him and get away all at the same time, succeeding at none of them as he marched forward. I have the power, he said. This is my sanctuary. This is my domain. You are the intruder. You are the liar. You are the evil. And I'm going to skin you alive. I'm going to make you scream, you bitch. I'm going to make you wish you were never born. Whatever they paid you, it wasn't enough. She backed against one of the shelves, tripping over the leg of a work table, almost falling on top of it. On top of the covered trap door in the corner. Irons followed, feeling that the beautiful, excited power coursed through him, feeling excited by her helplessness. Please, you don't want to do this. I'm not who you think I am. Her pathetic entreaties made him stop and laugh, wanting to add to her terror, wanting her to know that his control was absolute. She was wedged between a trophy shelf and the covered pit, and Iron stayed a safe distance away, enjoying the look on her glistening, overbright eyes. The panic of the trapped animal, soft and warm, powerless animal of a tender, pliable flesh. Irons licked his lip, his hungry gaze traveling over her limber, smooth, cowering form. Another trophy, another body to transform, and it was time to get down to business, to... What the? The board that covered the sub-basement entrance flew into the air, splitting with a tremendous crack, one jagged piece hitting Iron's hip. He staggered, not understanding. He was in control, yet something had gone horribly, horribly wrong. Something wrapped around his ankle, something that squeezed it so tight, he heard the bone being crushed and felt incredible, spiking pain travel up his leg. And he locked gazes with the girl, her eyes bright with a new terror. And in that instant of contact, of clarity, he wanted to tell her so much. Tell her that was a good man. He was a man who never deserved any of what happened to him. and the vice-like grip jerked. And Irons was falling, dropping the gun, pulled into the pit by his screaming, and the pain of the beast that waited for him down below. My sister is vacuuming. I wonder, can you guys hear that? You guys can probably hear that. My tongue is drying out. 1 minute Irons was standing in front of her, staring into her with a terrible, wrenching sorrow, and in the next he was gone, yanked into a hole in the floor by an arm that she only caught a glimpse of, a muscular, dripping arm with a foot-long claws. It whipped out of sight, taking Irons with it into the darkness below. There was another scream from the creature, a powerful, lusty howl that matched and then surpassed by intensity of Irons' terrified shriek. Frozen by the piercing screams, Claire could only listen in shock and relief, and fear for herself battling through her as the horrible cries swept up through the open hole, pounding her ears with the cold, dismal dungeon that Irons had created. Until his cries burbled to a stop only a second or two later, and the slurping, meaty, wet noises began. Claire moved, scooping up the handgun that Irons had dropped, and ran around the table in the middle of the room, not wanting to be grabbed and pulled under like he had. It killed him. It killed him, and it was going to kill me. The reality of what just had happened, of what would have happened, hit her all at once, turning her limbs into rubber. Claire forced herself a few more steps away from the open pit and collapsed against one of the sweating stone walls, taking in great whooping breaths of the bitterly scented air. He had been planning to kill her, but not right away. He had been planning to kill her, but not right away. She had seen it in his mad gaze, had crawled over his body, heard the eager anticipation in his crazy laugh. There was a low, grunting sound from the corner, a bestial sound, the growl of a well-fed lion. Claire turned, raising the heavy gun, astounded that she could feel any more horror. And something burst up from the hole, something with flailing arms. And Claire fired, the shot going wide, a glass bottle on a shelf exploding as the thing hit the floor. And it was Irons, but only half of him. He had been heavily bisected, neatly bisected, cut in two by the thing that had snatched him. Everything below the fleshy waist was gone, trails of torn skin and muscle hanging down over his oozing pools of blood that had replaced his legs. Claire backed towards the door, the weapon still trained on the opening, and heard the creature, the monster, scream again, an echoing howl that faded away, falling away into some distance that she couldn't imagine. A second later, she couldn't hear it at all. It was gone. Sherry's monster. That was Sherry's monster. She edged slowly towards the mangled corpse of Chief Irons, towards the empty, yearning blackness of the hole, but it wasn't all blackness. She could see light filtering from above somewhere. Enough that she could see there was another floor below, what looked like the metal grid pattern of a catwalk, and a ladder leading to it. A sub-basement? A way out? She stepped back from the opening, her thoughts racing and disorganized, trying to absorb the information along with what Irons had told her. Chris wasn't in Raccoon. The stars were gone. A wonderful, terrible relief because it meant that he was safe, but it also meant that he wasn't about to come running to save the day. There had been a spill at Umbrella, which explained the zombies. Ooh, wow, this is a long chapter. But what he had said about Birkin, about Birkin's virus, was that Sherry's father? And maybe the zombies are all the result of some laboratory accident. But what about all the other things Mr. X? Mr. X and the Inside Out Men? The way Irons had ranted about Umbrella suggested that while the accident was unexpected, the pharmaceutical company wasn't some innocent victim. What had he called it? T-virus, she said softly, and shivering. There was Birkin's new virus, and then there was the T-virus. The zombie disease had a name, and you didn't name something unless you knew something about it, which meant she didn't know what it meant. All she knew was that she and Sherry needed to get out of Raccoon, and the sub-basement might be a way. It wasn't a dead end. The monster had killed Irons and had gone somewhere. And do you really want to follow it with Sherry? It could come back, and if it actually is looking for her... Not a happy thought, but then neither was hitting the streets. The station was already crawling with God knows what other creatures. Claire checked the clip of the weapon magazine. Irons had left behind, counted 7 bullets. Not enough to face off what the thing had been in the station, but enough to maybe keep the monsters at bay. It was a chance, but she was willing to take it. Claire took a brief breath, blowing it out slowly, collecting herself. She needed to keep it together, for Sherry's sake, if not for her own. She turned, looking at the mangled remains of the police chief. It was a terrible way to have died, but she couldn't find in herself to feel sorry. He had been ready to rape and torture her. He had laughed when she had pleaded for her life, and now he was dead. She wasn't happy about it, but she wasn't going to shed any tears either. Her only feeling about it was that she should have covered her only thought about it was that she should cover him up before she brought Sherry down with her. The girl had seen enough violence for one lifetime. You and me both, kiddo. Claire thought tiredly and started to look around for something to drape over the dead Chief Irons. Okay. Leon caught up to her in the cold industrial hallway that led to the sewer's entrance, a few steps from the flooded sub-basement. She'd run ahead to plant the keys that would get them into the sewers, not wanting to have to explain how she'd come by them. She just managed to toss them into the boiler room before his footsteps sounded on the metal steps behind her. At least I don't have to fake being out of breath. Ada could see by the look on his face that she needed to smooth things over. She started talking the second he stepped into the shadowy corridor. I'm sorry I ran, she said, offering him a nervous smile. I hate spiders. I'm sorry I ran. Sorry, I'm trying to do her voice better. Leon frowned, studying her, and looking into his searching blue gaze, Ada realized that she was going to have to be better than that. She took a step closer to him, not close enough to be invasive, but enough that she could feel the heat he could feel the heat of her body. Maintaining eye contact, she tilted her head back to emphasize the height difference between them. It was a little thing, but in her experience, men generally responded well to the little things. I guess I'm just in a hurry to get out of here, she said quietly, losing the smile. I hope I didn't worry you. He dropped his gaze, but not before she saw a flicker of interest, confused and self-conscious, but definitely interest, which made it all the more surprising when he stepped away. Well, you did. Don't do it again, okay? I may not be much of a cop, but I'm trying, and God only knows what we're going to run into down here. He met her gaze again, speaking softly. I came with you because I want to help. I want to do my job, and I can't do that if you go charging ahead. Besides, he added, smiling a little, if you run off, who's going to help me? It was Ada's turn to look away. Leon was playing it straight with her, openly admitting to his fears, and his response to her was not so subtle flirtation. Her not so subtle flirtation had been to step back and tell her that he wanted to be a good cop. Interested, but not a fool for his tool, and the man's enough to tell me that he's unsure of his abilities. She was forced... Leon was a fucking, like, grade A act in this book, man. He was a role model for me growing up. She was still forced to smile back, but it was a shaky affair. I'll do my best, she said. Leon nodded and turned to inspect the hallway, letting the conversation drop. Much to Ada's relief, she wasn't sure what she thought of him, but was uncomfortably aware of her respect for him was growing. Not a good thing considering the circumstances. Did that make sense? Am I starting to ramble? Am I starting to get too lightheaded to do this? There wasn't much to see in the damp, poorly lit hall. 2 doorways and a dead end. The boiler room where she tossed the keys, the plugs rather, was directly in front of them. The sewer disposal entrance and a back corridor according to the sign on the wall, The other door opens into a storage closet. Ada followed as Leon walked to the closet, the closest of the two doors, the storage room, hanging back as he pushed it open with his magnum and stepped inside. Boxes, a table, a trunk, nothing more important, but at least no more creepy crawlies. After a quick search, he stepped back into the hall, and they moved towards the boiler room. How'd you learn to shoot like that anyway? Yeah, he kind of lost some character. He lost his nervousness, and I like Resident Evil 2 Leon because he feels way more real. Resident Evil 4 Leon is pretty damn good too. Wittier, but definitely still human in many respects. And then Resident Evil 6 Leon was, I mean, all the characters in Resident Evil 6 were just garbage, man. How'd you learn to shoot like that anyway? Leon asked as they stepped in front of the door. His tone was casual, but she thought they detected more than casual curiosity. You're pretty good. Were you in the military or something? Nice try, officer. Ada smiled, falling into her carefully rehearsed character. Paintball, believe it or not. I mean, I went target shooting some when I was a teenager with my uncle, but I never got into it much. And then a few years ago, a friend at work, we're both buyers at an art gallery in New York, dragged me into one of those weekend survival retreats, and we had a blast. You know, hiking, rock climbing, stuff like that. And paintball. It's great, we go up every couple of months, although I never thought I'd have to use it for real. She could actually see him buy it, and see that he wanted to buy it. It probably answered a few questions that he'd been hesitant to ask. Well, you're better than a lot of these guys, so a lot of the guys I graduated the academy with. Really? So you ready to get on with this? Ada nodded. Leon pushed the door to the boiler room open, scanning the ancient rusting machinery. In the wide empty space before ushering her inside, she made a point of not looking down, wanting Leon to find a small wrap package that she had tossed in a few moments earlier. She hadn't gotten a good look before. The room, shaped like a sideways H, was fitted with corridor railings and two massive old boilers, one on either side. Fluorescent lights sputtered overhead, the few that still worked casting... fluorescent lights sputtered overhead, and the few that still worked casting strange shadows across the metal pipes that ran down the watermarked walls. The door that led into the sewers... the door that led into the sewer system was in the far left corner, a heavy-looking hatch next to an insert panel. Hey! Leon crouched down, picking up the bundle of plugs that would open the hatch. Looks like somebody dropped something. Before Ada could go through the charade of asking him what he found, she heard a noise. A soft slithering noise coming from the area in the right back corner, neatly blocked from view by one of the boilers. Leon heard it too. He stood up quickly, dropping the bundle and raising his shotgun. Ada pointed her Beretta towards the sound, remembering how the door had been slightly ajar when she had come up from the sub-basement. Oh, hell. The implant. She knew it before it even crawled into sight, and it was shocked anyway. The little bugger had grown, and had grown fast, easily 20 times its former size in half as many minutes. And it was still growing, apparently, at an exponential rate. In the few seconds it took for the creature to move into the middle of the room, it went from the size of a small dog to the size and bulk of a 10-year-old child. The shape had changed, was changing too, was no longer the alien tadpole that had chewed its way out of Bertolucci. The tail was gone, and the creature that inched its way across the rustling floor had developed limbs, stretching arms folding out of its rubbery flesh. Claws popped out of the tan and swimming skin that swirled over its body, accompanied by the sounds of gristle being punctured. Muscular legs unfurled, liquid that snapped into sinewy shape as its stuttering crawl became a smoother, almost feline. The shotgun and the Beretta sounded in the same time. A string of massive blasts peppered the higher whine of the night. The string of massive blasts peppered with the high whine of the 9mm. The creature was still shifting, standing, mutating into a humanoid shape, and in response to the booming shots that smacked into the twisting flesh, was to open its mouth and vomit a grunting projectile scream of rotten green bile that hit the floor and started moving. The stream that gushed from its wide, flat face was alive, and the dozen or so crab-like creatures that stumbled out of the monster's gaping mouth like liquid seemed to know exactly where the threat to their fetid mutant womb. Where the threat was to their fetid mutant womb. The skittering, multi-legged animals swarmed towards Ada and Leon in a silent wave, as the implant monster took one massive step forward, pulsing cords standing out into the impossibly long, thick neck. Leon had the heavier firepower. "Got him!" Leon shouted, already targeting and shooting the closest of the tiny, bileless green crabs. They were fast, but she was faster. She pointed and squeezed. The baby monsters exploded into small fountains of dark Icarus fluid, dying as silently as they had come. Leon blasted again and again with the shotgun, but Ada couldn't spare a glance to see how he was flaring with the mother beast. 5 of the crawling babies left, 3 more rounds and she'd be dry, and she heard the shotgun clatter to the floor, heard the deep but less powerful fire of the 50 AE round resonating through the metal room as she picked off 2 more of the spider creatures, and her weapon clicked empty. Without stopping to think, Ada let go of her Beretta and dropped to the floor. She grabbed the shotgun by the barrel, rolling it up into a crouch beneath Leon's line of fire, and swung the weapon down hard. 2 of the mutant animals were smashed into goo by the heavy stock, but the third, the last of them, sprang forward with an unexpected burst of speed, and landed on her thigh, catching hold with needle-sharp claws. Ada dropped the shotgun, crying out as the animal scuttered up her leg, the warm, damp weight of it making her frantic with disgust. "Off! Get it off!" She felt back, more like, "Off! Get it off!" That's it. That's more than. See, sometimes when you're reading these things, you don't know exactly how they come out. She fell backward, slapping the creature had already reached her shoulder, and was skittering towards her face, towards her mouth. And then Leon was grabbing her, roughly pulling her up with one hand as he snatched the animal with the other. Ada stumbled against him, clutching his waist to keep from falling. The bug clung tenaciously to his fabric. Oh, Spreadsheet Castia. Whoever, if you're watching, thank you for subscribing. Spreadsheet Castia. That's an interesting name. Ada stumbled against him, clutching to his waist to keep from falling. The bug clung tenaciously to the tight fabric of her dress, but Leon took a good grip. He tore it away, shouting as he flung the flailing thing to the floor. "The Magnum!" The weapon was stuck in Leon's belt. Ada jerked it free, saw the creature land near the giant motionless heap that had birthed it, blasted to death by Leon, and fired, managing to get a clean shot despite how off balance she was, how deeply unnerving she was by how close she had come to being implanted. The round clanged against the floor, rust chips spluttering up, and the creature was blown into an ugly stain in the back wall, obliterated. Nothing moved, and the 2 of them stood there for a moment, leaning against each other like survivors of some sudden, terrible accident, which, in a way, they were. The entire firefight had taken less than a minute, and they had come out unscathed, but Ada wasn't going to kid herself about how close it had been, or what they had just managed to destroy. G-Virus. She was sure of it. The T-Virus couldn't have created such a complicated creature, not without having teams of surgeons. And they'd seen it grow. How big and powerful would a creature have become if they hadn't walked in when they had? The beast might have been some clearly G-string experiment, but what if it had been the result of a leak? What if there were more of them? The sewers, the factory, the underground levels, dark, shadowy places, secret places where anything could have been growing. Whatever the situation, the trip to the labs wasn't looking like a walk anymore, and Ada was suddenly very glad that Leon had decided to come along, since he was so goddamn insistent on going first. If something attacked, she'd have a better chance of surviving. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Leon, one arm still supporting her, looked into her eyes with a heartfelt concern. Ada realized that she could smell him, a clean, soapy smell, and pushed herself away. She handed the Magnum back to him, and straightened her dress, stupidiously inspecting it for rips to avoid looking at him. "Thanks, I'm fine. Don't sweat it." It came out harsher than she meant to, but she was rattled, and not just by the implant's vicious attack. She glanced at him. It wasn't sure how settled into his... wasn't sure how to feel when she saw that her response had caught him off guard. He blinked slowly, and a kind coolness settled into his gaze, indicating a strength of character that she hadn't bothered to give him credit for. "Paintball, huh?" he said mildly. Without another word, he turned to pick up the package she'd planted. Ada stared after him, telling herself how absolutely ridiculous it was to care what he thought of her. They were about to embark on a journey in which she might have to desert him, or watch him sacrifice his life in order to save her own. Or kill him myself, let's not forget that, friends. And neighbors. Friends and neighbors. So who gives a shit if he thinks I'm an ungrateful bitch? Straight up, she should thank him for reminding her. Straight up, she should thank him for reminding her. Ada stood down and retrieved the shotgun, feeling like she needed to do a better job of keeping her priorities straight, and feeling an emptiness inside that she hadn't noticed for a long time. Okay, we're making good progress. Okay, so I think we'll go through chapter 20 and then end it there. I'm feeling pretty drained. I forgot to eat anything, so I would want to get off some dinner. But I hope the 6 of you that are watching are enjoying the stream so far. Chapter 20. Mr. Irons had been a very bad man. A sick man. Sherry supposed that she'd known all along on some level, but seeing his secret torture chamber like some mad doctor's workshop made it all the more real. The room was just gross. Bones and bottles and a smell even worse than the zombies. Perhaps that was why seeing the shape on the floor, the incomplete body shape beneath the blood-stained tarp, didn't bother her half as much as Claire seemed to think it would. Sherry stared at it, wondering what had happened exactly. "Come on, sweetie, let's get going," Claire said, as the forced note of brightness in her voice told Sherry that Mr. Irons had been severely messed up. All Claire had told her was that Mr. Irons had attacked her, and then something had attacked him, and that there was a chance they could get somewhere safe if they went down into the basement. Sherry had been so relieved to see Claire at all that she hadn't bothered to ask questions. "Not big enough to be a whole person under there. Did he get eaten? Or chopped into pieces? Sherry, let's go, okay?" Sherry laid a hand on her shoulder, gently pulling her away from what was left of the police chief. Sherry let herself be led towards the dark hole in the corner, deciding that it was best to keep her questions to herself. She thought about saying that she didn't care about that Mr. Irons was dead, but she didn't want to appear rude or disrespectful. Besides which, Claire was trying to take care of her, and Sherry didn't mind that at all. Claire went down the ladder first, and after a second called up to her to tell her it was safe to come down. Sherry slipped carefully onto the metal rungs, feeling really happy for the first time in days. They were doing something. They were getting out of the RPD station and heading for escape. Whatever else happened, it was good to feel. Claire helped her down the last couple of rungs, lifting her and setting her on the metal floor. Sherry turned and looked around, her eyes widening. "Wow," she said, the words whispered away into the dim shadows that came back and reflected off the strange walls. "Yeah," Claire said. "Come on." Claire started walking, her boots clinking echoes, and Sherry's followed closely, still looking around in amazement. It wasn't like a bad guy's lair in a spy movie, some factory passage inside of a mountain or something. They were on a catwalk surrounded by rails, a murky green light coming up from the grate in the floor, from somewhere far below. And although there was rough brick to their right, to the left there was an actual cave wall. She could see a giant dripping pillars of stone that stretched off into the darkness, natural formations of rock that were stained green by the weak, ghostly light. Sherry wrinkled her nose, as interesting as it smelled pretty rotten, and she didn't like the way that the sound carried in the chilled air. making everything seem hollow. What do you think of this what do you think this place is? She asked softly. Claire shook her head. I'm not sure. Between the smell and the location, I say we're in part of a strange, we're part of a sewage treatment plant. Sherry nodded, glad to know, and even more glad to see that the way out was just ahead of them. The walkway wasn't very long. It turned left, and there was another ladder at the end, one that went up. When they got to it, Claire hesitated, peering up into the opening overhead, and then back around to the dark, empty cave. I should go up first. How about you climb up right behind, but stay on the ladder until I say it's clear? Sherry nodded, relieved. For a second, she'd been afraid that Claire was going to tell her to stay down here and wait like before. No way. It's dark, stinky, and lonely. If I were a monster, this is where I'd be. Claire went up, boosting herself easily through the hole, and Sherry clambered up just behind, holding the cool metal of the rungs tightly. After a few seconds, Claire's long, slender arms reached out to help her. They were back on solid ground, a short cement hallway that seemed incredibly bright after the cave. Sherry figured they were still in the sewage plant. The smell wasn't as bad as, but the hall was bordered on the left by a motionless river of sludge water, maybe a foot deep and 5 or 6 feet across. The muddy water ran in either direction, one end through a low rounded tunnel, the other stopped by a big metal door. It was all overlooked by some balcony that Sherry didn't see any stairs. It was all overlooked by a kind of balcony, but Sherry didn't see any kind of stairs. Which means... Oh, yuck. Do we have to? She asked. Claire sighed. Afraid so. But look at the bright side. No sane monster would follow us through that. Sherry smiled. It wasn't particularly funny, but she appreciated that Claire was trying to do. It was the same as covering up Mr. Iron's body, or telling her that her parents were probably safe. She's trying to shield me from how bad things really are. Sherry liked that, so much that she was already dreading the moment when Claire would leave her for good. Eventually she would. Claire had a whole life somewhere else, her own friends and family, and once they got out of Raccoon, she would go back to wherever she came from and Sherry would be alone again. Even if her parents were okay, she would be alone. And though she wanted very much for them to be safe and well, she wasn't looking forward to them at the end of time with the end of her time with Claire. She was only 12, but she'd known for a couple of years that her family was different from most. The other kids at school had parents who spent time with them, had birthday parties and went on camping trips, and had brothers and sisters and pets. She never had any of those things. She never knew that her parents meant well, and that they loved her. But sometimes she felt like no matter how quiet and good and self-sufficient she was still in their way. You ready for this? Claire's soft, pretty voice brought her back to the situation, reminding her that she needed to be more alert. Sherry nodded, and Claire stepped down onto the dark, dirty water, reaching back to help her. The water was cold and greasy and came up to Sherry's knees. It was gross, but not puking bad. Claire motioned towards the big metal door to the left with her new gun, looking as disgusted as Sherry felt. Looks like we're going to... A loud noise from the balcony cut her off, and they both looked up. Sherry instinctively moving closer to Claire as the noise came again. It sounded like footsteps, but too slow and too loud to be normal. And Sherry saw a man with a long dark coat walk into view, and felt her mouth go dry with fear. He was a giant, maybe as tall as 10 feet, and his bald skull gleamed with as white as a dead fish belly. She couldn't see him clearly because of the angle, but she could see enough. She could feel enough that he was bad, and that there was something very wrong and bad about him. It radiated off him like a sickness. Claire? She squeaked. Her voice... Claire? She squeaked, her voice breaking as the giant man stalked across the balcony. He started to turn towards them, slowly, so slowly that Sherry didn't want to see his face, didn't want to see the face of a man that could frighten her so deeply just by walking onto a balcony. Run! Claire grabbed her hand, and then two of them splashing through the thick water towards the sealed door. Sherry concentrated on not falling, on praying that door will be open. Don't be locked! Don't be locked! And not looking back, she, not wanting to see that man, that giant bad man was doing. not waiting to see what the giant Batman was doing. The door was closed, but it seemed to take forever. Each second stretched out as they fought against the weight of the cool, oily water. They stumbled into the hatch that Claire found its control, slamming at its buttons with a kind of panic that made Sherry feel even more afraid. The door split in the middle, one half sliding up into the ceiling and the other slipping beneath the rippling waves. Sherry didn't look back, but Claire did. Whatever she saw made her leap through the door, pulling Sherry off her feet and hurtling into the long, dark tunnel that lay behind the hatch. As soon as they were through, Claire fumbled for the wall and slid the door closed behind them, sealing the door into dripping darkness. "Don't move and be quiet," Claire whispered. In the very dim light that came from somewhere ahead, Sherry could see that she was holding the gun out in front of her, trying to search for the heavy shadows for any new threats. Sherry obeyed, her heart pounding, wondering what that man had been. It was the man Claire had asked her about before. That much was obvious, but what was he? People didn't get that big, and Claire had been scared too. Clink. A metal noise, soft and muffled from the wall behind her, and Sherry felt the water around her feet starting to move suddenly, a swift rush of current that pulled her legs, pulling her off balance. And she stumbled, tripped, plunging face first into the cold, nasty water as the current got stronger, sucking her backwards. Suckling. Ugh. Ugh. Sherry reached out, trying to find anything to hold on to, and felt slimy stone whip beneath her clutching fingers as the water rushed her away from Claire. "Can't breathe!" Sherry kicked wildly, twisting her body and eyes stinging into the bad water, and managed to take a breath as her head broke the surface, as she realized that she was in a tunnel, a pitch-black shaft no bigger than the vents of the station. The swift water carried her along, Sherry taking again deep gasps of foul air overhead, forcing herself not to struggle against the relentless power of the hissing liquid. The tunnel had to end somewhere, and wherever it came out, she had to be ready to run. "Claire, please find me. Please don't give up on me." She was lost, blind and deaf, sliding down through the darkness, and the farther and farther away from the only person who could protect her. From the nightmare of creatures that had taken over Raccoon. Almost there. Annette no longer doubted that her husband had escaped the laboratory levels. Not only were half the facility entrances unsealed, the fences that surrounded the facility had been breached, and the sewer tunnels, the tunnels that should have been mostly empty, were crawling with human carriers that had to come from outside. Even as advanced as they have been in terms of cellular deterioration, she had to shoot down five of them just to clear a path from the tram to the sewage operation room. After what seemed like an eternity trudging through semi-treated, inky waters of the labyrinth system, she had come to the platform she had been looking for. Annette stepped up into the concrete platform she'd been looking for. Annette stepped into the concrete tunnel, gazing warily at the closed door a few meters in front of her. Closed and undamaged, a good sign. But what if he had gone through before he had lost all traces of human intelligence? Before he had grown into an unthinking, violent animal? Even now, he might still retain some semblance of memory. The truth was, she didn't know. The G-Virus hadn't been tested on humans yet. And if he didn't go through, if he made it to the police station... No, she couldn't. Wouldn't entertain the possibility. Considering what she did know about the progressive chemophysiological changes, what he would be capable of doing if the virus worked its way the way it was supposed to, the thought of him getting to the unfettered population, well, it was unthinkable. The station is safe, she thought firmly. Irons may be an incompetent ass, but his cops aren't. Whether William is, he couldn't have gotten past them. She couldn't afford to believe anything else. Sherry was there. If she had done what she was supposed to do, and besides being on her own flesh and blood, which to remind herself was reason enough, Sherry played a very important role in her future plans. Annette leaned against one cold, sweating wall, aware time was running out, but simply unable to go on without resting for a moment. She'd been counting on She had been counting on encoded territorial instinct to keep him close to the lab, and had been so sure that she would find him, that their live human scent would lure him to her. But she was almost at the end of the containment area, and all she found were a dozen ways in which she could have escaped. An umbrella would be here soon. I have to get back. I have to activate the failsafe before they can stop me. William deserved to be at peace, but beyond that, destroying the creature that had once been her husband would eradicate all of her the doubts of her success of her objective. What if she blew the lab and escaped, only to find that Umbrella had captured him? All of her struggles, all of her work, for nothing. So all of her struggles, all of his work, for nothing. Annette closed her eyes, wishing that there had been an easy way to make the decision that had been made. The fact that William's death simply wasn't as crucial as getting rid of the lab. And there was a good chance that they wouldn't find him. They weren't even aware of his transformation. And it's not as though I have a choice. He's not here anymore. He's not anywhere. She pushed her way past the wall, walking slowly towards the door. She would check the last few tunnels, perhaps to see if the conference room showed any signs of damage. Then she would go back. And finish what Umbrella had started. Annette pushed the door open, and heard the footsteps echoing through the lonely corridor from somewhere up ahead. The hall was shaped like a T, and sounds melting into themselves, making it impossible to tell from which direction they were coming. But they were so strong and sure steps of an unaffected humans. But they were the strong, sure steps of uninfected humans, perhaps more than one, and that could only mean one thing. Umbrella. They finally come. Rage boiled up through her, making her hands shake, her lips curl back from gritting teeth. It had to be them. It had to be one of the murdering spies. Besides Iron and a few of the city officials, only Umbrella knew these tunnels were still in use, and they led to the underground facility. The possibility that it was some innocent survivor of the spill didn't cross her mind, and neither did running. She'd raised her handgun and waited for the heartless murdering bastards to appear. A figure stepped into sight, a woman in red, and Annette fired. Bam! But she was trembling, screaming inside, and the shot went high. It ricocheted off the cement wall with a whining, zipping sound, and the woman was raising a weapon of her own. And Annette fired again. Bam! Zip! But suddenly there was another one, a blurred flying shape that leapt in front of the woman, knocking her out of the way, and all of it happening at once. And Annette heard the cry of pain, a man's cry of pain, and felt a burst of roaring triumph. Got him! I got him! But there could be more. She hadn't hit the woman, and they were trained killers. Annette turned and ran, her dirty lab coat flying, her wet shoes slapping against cement. She had to get back to the lab fast. Time had run out. And that, we're going to leave it at chapter 21. I hope you all enjoyed this reading. I know we're kind of dwindling in numbers, but I've had a good time, and I'm glad that you guys could join me. If you guys want to support the channel, if you're viewing it from the gaming link, you can hit the join button. I don't know if that's still there anymore, if it even exists, because I know YouTube Gaming got taken down, but like for some reason my link still works. I know you guys are probably subscribers already, and it's most likely. If you guys wouldn't mind sharing this around for other people to watch, I would very much be happy about it. Let me just quickly change the name. Chapters 14, the previous chapters, they were, if it would load, chapter 15 through 20. Alright, well thank you guys so much for watching. I had a fun time, but I need to go eat before I pass out. Catch you all on the flip side.